Hello, and welcome to this roundtable discussion on pivoting from the opera industry to tech. My name is Brittany Nickel, and today I'm joined by Gabe Weiner, Joseph Gaines, Michelle Fisher, and Spencer Blank. I'd like to take a moment, have each of you briefly introduce yourselves.
Yeah, so hi everyone. I'm Michelle Fisher. I work at Microsoft. I lead our strategy for marketing, media, and data monetization for our global retail and consumer goods team for on the commercial side, on the enterprise side. So I spent time in opera in my earlier years. I got a Bachelor of Music for the University of Southern California. And spent time doing, Aspen Music Festival after that, and then went to the Tel Aviv Opera House to do some singing and internships there, and then made the pivot. So that's my story.
I can go next. Hi, everybody. My name is Joe Gaines. So I am a product manager for various and sundry software companies. And yes, I too was an opera singer for a minute. I did my undergraduate degree at the University of Houston, and then I did a graduate fellowship via the Rotary Foundation at the Felix Mendelssohn Conservatory in Leipzig, Germany. I was there for about a year. And I sort of weaved in and out of the corporate world and the nonprofit world after I was done with my education before I sort of committed to singing full time. So I was really in the biz for a little over a decade, depending on how you want to count. And I had a nice career. I was a character tenor, worked all over the US. It was great. And then I started moving into tech maybe 6-7 years ago, again, depending on how you count. But I've worked in data privacy, I've worked in renewable energy, I've worked for various nonprofits, and I've also worked in streaming media. And I'm currently self-employed as a product management consultant.
Awesome. Spencer, would you like to go?
Hi. So I actually came to the table as an opera coach, pianist, conductor, and realized I just didn't love performing. Go figure. But anyway, got my degrees in piano performance from University of Oregon, UT Austin, and an artist diploma along the way. So I also had a similar career where it looked really fancy on paper. I was going to Europe, I was going all around the country, and actually didn't do the day job thing until I just really wanted to zoom out. I was living in New York and I saw the ones that were really successful, the top of the business pianist coaches in New York, and they were scrambling around like a chicken with their head cut off, and well into their 50s and 60s. And so I was 23, 24 at the time and said, I don't know that I love it that much to be able to sacrifice my entire life just, for these things. And I don't even want to diminish what those things are. To some people, that is exactly the most important. And to me, it just wasn't. I just wanted authentic relationships, and I wanted, a life rooted in things that I could stand behind. Um, so I figured, oh, maybe if I put on the suit and was kind of the executive of the nonprofit arts organization, then I could, change and impact my community through the arts and maybe make somewhat of a salary. I realized, working in nonprofit has its own things, which we could get into later in this conversation. So anyway, I didn't while away in too long in that. I fell completely backwards into a contract role at a tech company, where I think I was project manager of workplaces or something. And the company was going public in 2 weeks. So they were like, hey, we need somebody to plan all of the global office celebrations for going public. I was like, okay, if there's anything I know how to do. It's like turn up on opening night. So 6 months later, it turned into them creating a role for me as head of employee experience and culture and events. And so I lovingly refer to myself as Julie from the Love Boat for tech companies. And that's kind of the little niche I've stayed in over the years. And over the summer, just launched my own consulting company that I call Yogurt for live and active workplace culture. And so I still bring that kind of cheeky humanity that actually, frankly, we were all trained to do as performing artists. I just bring that now into the corporate workplace. So that's my story.
And that leaves me. I guess background on the music side was I did an undergrad at University of Southern California also in opera and vocal performance. Went to Vienna, Austria for masters for about 6 years. And then over the course of that, the main thing that was fueling me was a love of languages, and that being an excuse, like opera being an excuse to learn more languages. And so I developed a method for myself. I actually had an engineering background at the same time for my undergrad, and I built this method for learning languages quickly that worked really well. And I started writing about it. That turned into an article that went viral. That article turned into a book deal with Random House, and then that led to a book coming out. And that book kind of threw me into tech. It did really, really well, eventually became a bestseller. There were a lot of products that didn't exist that would work well with that book. And so I ran a Kickstarter to kind of launch those initial products. By the end of those 4 years, I had like 30,000 customers, and they all wanted an app, and I didn't know how to build an app. And so I started a startup to build them an app. Launched another Kickstarter that turned into the most successful Kickstarter for an app ever. Like it just kind of kept spiraling. Eventually we took on VC funding. I learned how to do that. Like I was just running as CEO of this startup that I kind of fell into. A year ago, I've backed away from that. There's another CEO that's running our company fabulously, who was our head of operations before. At this point, I'm doing more consulting work on product side. I'm probably going to eventually move into someone's head of product role or VP of product role in a year or two. But for now, I'm just kind of enjoying doing part-time product consulting. And that's where I'm at right now.
I'm Brittany, and I'm the Director of Support here at Dover. Dover is a tech startup in the process of disrupting the recruiting space. We just recently launched a free ATS, or applicant tracking system, and offer a full suite of best-in-class services from candidate sourcing to recruiting operations, even scheduling and interviewing. Big thanks to Dover for sponsoring this chat and for providing us a platform so that we could even have this discussion to explore what it means to hire people from non-traditional backgrounds. Like many of you watching and the other folks on this panel, I too was an opera singer in a previous life. In 2019, I was fresh from performing in San Francisco and was busy doing auditions and competitions and needed a job that would sort of board the plane with me, so to speak. So I was chatting with one of my really good friends who's also named Brittany. Hi, Brittany. And she was letting me know that the co-founder of the company that she was currently working at had reached out and was looking for a little bit of help with answering emails. And I thought, well, I've sent an email before. I'm sure I could do that. And, I had no idea what I was getting myself into. Things quickly evolved from there, as I think they do in most early stage startups. And I found myself doing what I had always done, which was hustling through and learning as I went. It's certainly been a really exciting and thrilling adventure. And I'm so excited to explore, everyone else's journey and path to discovering what else is out there beyond the curtain.
You all have such interesting backgrounds, by the way. It's fabulous to meet you, Spencer. Everything you said was about your reasoning for kind of stepping down from this career resonated so much with me. I kind of did the exact same thing when I went to the Tel Aviv Opera House. I would have dinner with all of these amazing sopranos, and I just did not love their lives. I did not want those lives. It's like something deep within my gut knew that I was in it for the adventure.
Mm-hmm.
I don't love it enough for that. And so it was a real turning point for me. When I came back, I started taking voice lessons from one of the most well-known Wagnerian singers in the US. And I honestly I didn't love her life either. It seemed lonely, especially on the other side of it where, she wasn't singing as much anymore and she was looking for teaching jobs and things like that. And I was like, if someone like you is still, kind of racing around looking for the next thing and the next validation point, I just knew that I couldn't live my life that way, that I'd be missing something. It started feeling more like that this thing that I loved was getting in the way of my life rather than the thing that was my life or that I thought was going to be my life was going to lead me there.
Sure.
And for me, one of the big turning points was when I looked at it less as turning away from or selling out
Hmm.
from the thing and turning more towards my own authentic values and goals in life, you know.
Yeah,
I think
I
everybody
couldn't
on
agree
this call
more.
could probably really resonate with that. It's just, this was actually me running towards something, which maybe at the time felt like running away, but there was still some higher calling. After working this hard and getting all the degrees and doing all the things, you're not just gonna ditch it, like
Yeah,
a stray dog.
Hmm.
That there really has to be that higher calling to what you want in your life. And you could couch it as more or better or whatever. And in point of fact, it's just different. It's just, you can't even compare it, you know?
yeah. And I have friends that are still opera singers that are living the life that I knew I couldn't live and loving it. But I knew it wasn't for me. It was not my authentic self at all. Too much of a control freak. I really like knowing.
That.
I felt like the world was full of possibility when I got out of opera because I could do anything. I could do marketing. And there's so many cool jobs out there. I could write, I could do whatever I wanted,
Yeah.
but I was limited to coloratura soprano and whatever that meant for whatever house I could have gotten into when I
Right.
was an opera singer. So it was very limited. Even though you feel like you're in this beautiful artistic world, you're actually limited to whatever subjective personality is in front of you that either likes you or doesn't like you.
Yeah, I also years ago I was applying for some muggle job, I don't remember what, and I was introduced to the concept of like the push-pull theory of when you change a job or change a career, which is that there's always something that's simultaneously pushing you and pulling you. And for me, it was sort of I got tired of being poor.
Yeah,
I was
me
for
too.
a time for a time I mean I was probably for at least a couple of years, I was one of the top 10 or 12 people in the US doing my repertoire. And I was still coming home and then driving for Uber and stuff like that, like in between. And no disrespect, right? We all do what we got to do and there's honor in all work, but it wasn't satisfying for me, right? So there was that sort of like, to quote another singer friend of mine who changed careers years ago, I'm too smart to be this poor. So that always resonated with me. But the pull part of it too was when I was a kid, I dreamed of being like a scientist. I dreamed of being an engineer or an architect or an inventor or something like that. But I struggled with math. And so I was sort of like, I steered or was steered away from sort of those quantitative disciplines. And one of the things that I like really caught my eye when I started looking into roles in tech was the possibility of, in the abstract, being able to work alongside software engineers, let's say, who are building the thing, even if it's this intangible thing that's zeros and ones. But then, depending on which industry I was in, to actually work much more closely along with actual like hard engineers and hard science as well. I found that a lot in working in energy as well. And that's something that like I never would have gotten from opera. So I was sort of, I reached a point where I was like, there's gotta be something more for me. And Michelle, just like you, like I went from being like, okay, if I can get 6 opera companies in the US to like me enough to hire me, on a rolling basis, maybe I'm gonna be okay, to like, oh, suddenly like I'm in a field with 10,000 companies and 100,000 jobs, right? And I mean, we can talk about what the tech job market is like right now later, which is it's its own conversation, right?
Yeah.
And yet, to go from, I don't know, what, 150 companies in the US, if that, to many tens of thousands of opportunities from startups all the way on up to giant enterprise. It changes your world. It's transformative.
Absolutely, I would agree. I think Michelle, something you said that really resonated with me is the idea of looking at what success might have looked like for other people, or even looking at what success I thought looked like for me, and actually taking the time to ask myself if that was what I wanted. And it's a scary thing to actually be in a point where you ask yourself that, is this what I thought that I was supposed to do? Is this what I've spent hundreds of thousands of dollars of government student loan money trying to accomplish? Is it actually what is going to make me feel good? This adrenaline high, this performance high that I was constantly chasing, was that enough to sustain the lows? Because for me, it was always the highs were really great. And when things were going really well, it was super exciting. But the other side of the coin, which I think probably all of us have experienced, was for me, mentally not a healthy space to continuously be in. And I kind of fell into Dover on accident, and it's ended up being one of the better things that I've been able to do for myself. And it's scary to kind of take a step back and be like, I'm not doing what I thought I was going to do forever. But also,
particularly because of the like level of intensity and ferocity that you like everybody on this call pursued it with, you know. I want to go back to the beginning of the conversation of like, have you actually dealt with what drew you to it in the first place? Because I think if you get back to that core, that seedling of what was authentically drawing you to it. And for me, after all this time, I think the binarity of black and white at the piano, it's literally black and white. And there are right notes and there are wrong notes. I think that binarity and that simplicity of push button, receive bacon was what I chased. It was that if I did these things, I could get here. Not realizing no careers are linear. Nothing in the world is linear. I don't know who the hell gave me that idea that it was going to actually be, yes, do this, and then you'll sing Tusk on the Met stage. So in my undoing work, it's been around embracing the beauties of ambiguity. You know, there is no control to be had, Michelle. There's a hell of a lot more of it when you're not freelancing, but still, like, let go.
It's funny. This is such a fun conversation. This is definitely the most fun conversation that I've had all week. But one of the things that when we thinking about skills that you acquire in that type of a ferocity that you're putting all of your passion towards this type of a degree or role or whatever it is, you have a competitiveness and a stubbornness to you to get to that type of a level, which can be very advantageous in the tech world too. So I think that what getting out of it was tough because we're all somewhat stubborn. We all proved to everybody we loved in our lives that we were going to do this one thing and we were going to do it well and we were good enough. And then it was the competitiveness of getting to Glimmerglass or getting to Aspen or getting to a young artist program or whatever it was, just to show that we could do it. And then it was like, so I'm afraid of what everybody else is that I have proven that I've done this to, that I've made this my life, and getting out of that cycle of thought too. Because of all of the debt too, Brittany, all of the things that you have put into it. But that can be really advantageous in the tech world. You can put all of that competitiveness towards becoming very agile in an industry that is constantly moving, and tech that is always going somewhere new, and a role that's always evolving, or maybe your own career that's always evolving. So I actually think that that's a huge advantage when I think of the skill of stubbornness, competitiveness, the hard work that you to get to where you are, the adaptability that it takes to pivot to a new degree or a new
absolutely.
part of your life. These are all things that are absolutely required. And one of the things that one of you brought up was also empathy and emotional intelligence. That is a really undervalued, huge skill that is so necessary in the tech sector, because you, just like composers are talking a different language oftentimes than sopranos, the engineers are always talking in a different language than the sales people and the marketing people and the strategy people or whoever it may be. And to be able to be that connective tissue has actually been a huge advantage in my life. Like being able to understand what everybody's motivation is, which I think when you're in the music industry and dealing with the characters that you're dealing with, people with huge personalities and big egos and whatever, you're dealing with the same stuff in a different costume with tech. But I think that you're better equipped as a singer to manage it than people who have not had to deal with those types of personalities before.
Absolutely. I think
Mich-
there's so many transferable skills that singers take for granted, artists take for granted. And being in the recruiting space, you know, I'm sort of front and center at the things that people think that they want to be looking for, the signals that they think that they want. But as I think everyone here knows, that can look so many different ways. I'm actually really curious, Gabe, as a founder, when you were looking at, you know, building your own company and potentially doing recruitment for roles and building out what this was going to be, how did your experience, you know, being an artist help you determine what you wanted to look for or how you wanted to engage with people?
One of the pieces I think that came up early was this idea of like, if I'm going to be coming out of the arts, I would like my workspace to be a place that I actually want to be in. I don't want some sort of drab, hard, like corporate thing that I keep like hearing about. And so this was kind of my first entry into the corporate world. And so really early on, we started building cultural documents saying like, well, this is what we stand for. This is the kind of place we want to be in. And then we ran with those. And so a lot of the hiring processes were about like, well, who can be flexible? Who can adapt in the way that Michelle was talking about? I think one of the things that was really, really impactful from the music side was an ability to take direction. Like this, there's a sense of like, oh, you're a startup founder, therefore you need to know everything in advance. And like, actually, there's no way you're going to know anything in advance. Like that job is so varied. It requires expertise in so many things that you have no shot at being an expert in, that you just simply have to lean on everyone. And leaning on people was my entire opera career. Like it's how many coaches can tell me how to do this thing? How many people can tell me how to do proper diction? Who's my language teacher? Who is my singing teacher? How many singing teachers can I get? And how can I judge who these people who are giving me advice left and right, like which one of those has good advice? And so even this cultural part, that came from other people. I didn't know what the hell I was doing. I just kept talking to people, being like, help, help, help. And eventually someone came up being like, culture, start now. And I'm like, oh, great, cool, let's start now. And so taking direction and running with it, I would say, put me so far ahead of most of the other people in the field. I saw so many people stubbornly deciding that they had expertise when they didn't. And the ability to know, like, actually, I don't know a damn thing ever in this process. Even with the book, before the company even started, there was a sense of like, well, I don't know what I'm doing. I just know how to learn languages. Let me go get a book on how to write books. Let me go get a book on how to write well. Let me get a book on how to write a proposal and then follow all of that. That feels pretty central to really every step along the way for my career. And I suspect that's going to apply to really anyone who's gone through what we've all gone through.
Gabe, I think some of the best management advice that I've heard from both heads of opera companies as well as startup founders is surround yourself with people who are smarter than you are and then listen to them and empower them to do their jobs.
Yeah. And I mean,
Absolutely.
that kept happening. And I got really fortunate, and also like I got fortunate to find really great people, but also like I went through 6 personal assistants in 6 months the very first time I hired anyone. I mean, it's hard to find good people, and people will fail spectacularly in ways that you're like, that I didn't know that was possible to just like do this. And so there was a lot of trial by fire, but yeah, the end result of as soon as you get one person who is better than you at whatever it is that they do, then that grows. You can be like, hey, you who's really, really great, can you find me another person who's really great like you? And then you start building out from there.
I think this natural sort of thing that happened for me was when I started at Dover. It's basically what you just outlined, Gabe, is kind of what happened. The team was like, oh, here's someone who innately has this hustle and grit that a lot of startup people, a lot of people in tech want to see from people. And they were like, that seems like something we should try to explore more of. That sounds like the ideal person who's probably going to work hard and wants to do a good job. And there's so many artists who have this innately, and that's an incredible asset to growing companies, regardless of size. I think something that would probably be really helpful for people who are watching this, I would love to hear from all of you around how folks who are looking to make a change, make a pivot, maybe make an intentional choice of trying to go after something new, can market themselves. How should they go about putting their materials together? Where should they start? What do you think were things that you did that helped, each of you be able to take that next step?
I have like really strong feelings about this. I think we're talking to the community that really has taken time and care to build their art and their brand. So the substance is there, whether it's immediately squishable into a director of customer support or trainable into that. I think it is good to use your network. And I think because we've come from such a bizarrely judgmental, knocking people down kind of paradigm in that industry, at least I found it to be highly caustic. We're not used to truly leaning on people. Like I actually posted on Out in Tech, which is the LGBTQ tech Slack community last week, about it was for resume kind of advice, because I'm making a geographic move and wanting to kind of dump out everything that wasn't working and totally start fresh. And the advice that came back was so much of forget the how you're telling it, just stick to the core of the story of who you are. So I think what I wanted to say was, once you know the authentic why, like it goes to Simon Sinek's book, Start With Why. So many other great thinkers and speakers always talk about going back to the roots of who you are and how to promote that.
I think one piece to throw in here, generally the level that is available, like in terms of like when I was doing a lot of hiring, obviously, like in my role, and was involved in every hiring process that we did. And the average level of people coming in is not all that high. I think for people who are singers, there is this thing where you've been, as Spencer mentioned, like you're beat down a lot. There's a lot of people telling you you are not good enough, that you need to be a little bit more perfect, etc. And I can imagine trying to make a pivot into the tech industry and being like, well, how on earth am I supposed to be perfect at, programming Python? How on earth am I supposed to be perfect at customer service? Like there's all these roles, and I've been told I need to be in the upper 1%, and I don't know this role yet. How on earth can I get to that upper 1%? And like, you don't need to. The things we were looking for generally are, can you be more or less capable and enthusiastic about getting better? And like anyone who's gone through what we've gone through is able to do that in spades. And so to anyone who might be struggling with some imposter syndrome about moving into a new industry, I just want to throw that little bit in of like, your willingness to improve on anything actually sets you apart from the vast majority of the workforce. And I don't mean that like super cynically or just everyone's terrible or anything like that. Like they're not. People aren't terrible. People are deciding how much energy to give a job. But the amount of energy that everyone who is listening to this has given their jobs up to this point is enormous. And if you give a fraction of that to any job in the tech industry, you will be head and shoulders above most other candidates, even if you don't have as much experience as some of the other people applying.
I think that the fact that as a singer, you're so used to rejection is a huge advantage in any job that you want to move into, not just tech. When one of my first jobs was in sales outside of singing. And just the fact that I was selling someone else's product and not myself as a human was unbelievably it was like a huge weight lifted off my shoulders. It was like running without weights for the first time. I was like, go ahead and reject me. You're hilarious. You know, it was, so I think that, you know, not having to worry about, am I too short? Am I too tall? Am I too young? Am I not experienced enough? Like, is the timbre of my voice enough? Did that audition go well enough? Those are all things that are so deeply personal, and you can blame yourself for days and days and days about. Now, when I went and sold other people's products, it was so easy for me to just walk into the room and say, well, yeah, you don't like what? Okay, that's okay. Yeah, I don't care. But the competitiveness and the wanting to do well is what kept me going in that industry. And I pivoted in my own career, but I would also say it's to the non-linear point. I am in a job right now that I would have never predicted 10 years ago, that didn't exist 10 years ago. And before that, I was in a job that didn't exist when I was in college. You know, like it's, you have no idea where this is going to go. But I do think that getting used to all of that rejection is only going to help you. It's going to actually set you apart, and make you stronger than all of the folks that have never had to put themselves out there like that and get rejected. So more power to all of you that have been through all of that rejection and are thinking of pivoting away from all of that. I think that you're going to sail free and be super happy, not to mention the fact that you can get sick. You have sick days. And that is pretty awesome. I mean, even having that realization at first, where I was like, I have the flu, but I don't have to perform, but I don't have to do an audition, but I'm not under the gun. I don't have to suck out of a humidifier for days and days and days, hoping I might be able to get my toe in the door somewhere. And that is pretty amazing. I'll throw that out there too.
I actually loved getting sick for the first year. I was just like, this is
right.
so sick. This is so
I
sick.
know. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter.
To all of that, and playing off of some of what you all have already said, I think for anyone who's considering pivoting, thinking really hard about why you're doing it, like above and beyond the fact that you don't want to be poor, thinking really hard about what specifically about working in tech in general, or working in a specific industry, or working in a specific role attracts you. And obviously, if you're coming to it and you're like, I don't even know how software is built, right? Like, so leaning in on that curiosity that you had to cultivate as a student, a university student, or maybe even a grad student, and a singer in general, and taking that out into the workforce, like you would be amazed at how often people are willing to give you 30 minutes of their time. Like super senior executives at companies who are, you know, like, especially if you don't approach them from the perspective of hire me, hire me, hire me, but you're there to say, yeah, I'm looking for a, you know, a pathway in. Can you tell me about yourself? Can you tell me what is your job like? What is your career? What does it mean to be a product manager, or a designer, or a software engineer, or a marketer in software, or to work in sales, or to be a product marketer? Like, what are all of these things? What do these things mean? So I would encourage people to lean very heavily on that when you're starting out. You, Brittany, you asked also like what in general are some things that you can do. So one thing that I did along the way is I taught myself by doing, kind of like what Gabe was describing with his startup. So one of the best pieces of advice that I got from another former singer who's now an executive at a very large global tech staffing company, he said, you know, boot camps or whatever, certificates or whatever, people don't really care. Go out and build something. Go out and make something, right? And even if you don't know how to make it, then teach yourself how to make the thing that you want to make, right? And similar to advice that writers get when they're first starting out, lean into your existing domain expertise, right? So for me, I ended up building a web-based community development space for Central City Opera that was rather short-lived. It only existed for a few months after it launched. But in the process, I taught myself market research. I taught myself UX research. I taught myself design. I taught myself usability testing. I iterated on things. I did lots of stakeholder management, both at the company and in terms of other folks who were formerly affiliated with other artists, sort of, who were alums of the company, to get them excited and to try to gauge their interest. I gathered quantitative and qualitative data. I documented all of it. I turned it into a case study, and I put that on a website. And then suddenly I had something to talk about when I was interviewing for my first tech roles, right? Even though I wasn't paid a dime for that, and even though it didn't ultimately succeed beyond, much beyond launch, because you know what? You gotta, if you're gonna be a founder, you gotta be willing to fail, right? But I learned a lot from that. And then when I started talking to people one-on-one and taking friends out for coffee, people like us who work in tech, and saying, hey, Michelle, Gabe, Spencer, Brittany, tell me about your lives. Then I had something to talk about. I had some context for it. And then I was like, ooh, product management. That sounds really interesting. I could talk about that later, but yeah, that was sort of my pathway in anyway.
I love all of these comments so much, and I just want to also throw out there that the first 3 or 4 jobs that I had sucked. They were terrible jobs. And so I think that when you have something that you're really passionate about and you're working towards, and then you go into this job that is somewhat soul sucking, it can be really deflating. And you say, okay, wait, did I make the right decision? That being said, you're not going to thrive most likely the first time you get out. You might really enjoy being sick, like Gabe and I. And, some of the things that are coming off of your shoulders are going to be really awesome. But at the same time, I wouldn't, a lot of the challenges in hiring in the tech sector, it's really difficult, actually, more, in my opinion, for mid-level managers and above to be getting some of those jobs. It's very, very high stakes there, and there's a lot of people sitting on the bench. However, to get an entry-level position, I would say you're much better poised. And it's not going to be your dream job, but it's going to get you to the next one and the next one and the next one. And I would say just keep going on the authenticity of what you actually want out of your life. I get to come home and see my 3 kids every single day. I get to help them with their homework. And if I, fall and break my back, I have insurance. These types of things that that may or may not matter to you. Figure out, I guess, if they matter to you at all. And I'm so sorry I have to drop right now for another call, but I really hope this isn't the last time that I get to chat with you all, because I have mad respect for all of you. I really, really enjoyed my conversation with you all today. So thanks for having me, Brittany.
Of course, thank you for joining. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, and one last thing for the bigger crew is I have never gotten a job that I didn't know somebody, like Dover opening up the door for me, or somebody that I have connected with that has known somebody who's known somebody. So again, I think that I think it was Gabe who said, we're used to this challenge with each other in, the soprano space or whatever it may be. That doesn't actually exist on the outside. I've helped a lot of people, and a lot of people have helped me. And I found that people are very, very supportive, especially women in tech. There's not enough of us. So not that it's not great, all of you men on the call as well. But I've found moms in tech, women in tech, lots of support in those particular arenas. So don't worry, reach out. We're here for you.
There is something actually that Michelle brought up, which I think is a really important thing for people to consider, and I would be keen to hear y'all's thoughts as well. I feel like as a singer, I thought I needed to follow this specific model of get into this type of program, and that is successful. I will be successful if I sing at the Met. I will be successful if I sing at San Francisco Opera. I will be successful, or I will have done what I'm supposed to be doing if I hit X goal. And I feel like that's sometimes when you're starting to try and find a new job, you're like, I will only be successful if it's a good job and it's exactly what I'm looking for and I'm happy and I found exactly what I thought that I was looking for as a singer. And if that's not what you experience in your first maybe job post, leaving the arts, it can seem maybe like you failed, or it can seem like, did I make the right choice? You start to question, Gabe, I think you brought up imposter syndrome. That definitely is something I've dealt with countless times. And I think that there's this a freeing sense that you have to kind of embrace, this kind of free fall when you decide that you're going to try something new, and be okay with understanding that it's okay for a job to not work out. When I first got my offer at Dover, I called up my uncle who works at Deloitte, his partner, and I was like, I don't know what to do. What do these numbers mean? How is this like a good offer? Like, what does this mean? What if I don't like it? And my uncle was like, Brittany, people quit jobs all the time. And I was like, yeah, but in the arts, if you say no to an offer, you're blacklisted. Or if you don't accept whatever offer they've given, does that mean I'm not grateful for the opportunity? And I think there's a lot of stigma that follows artists as we're looking into these new areas that we don't even realize does not exist in other career paths. And so I'm interested from y'all what you would continue to encourage people to embrace, whether it's, if a job isn't a fit, it's okay to try again. If you don't like what you're doing, similarly to the leap of leaving maybe the arts, it's okay to keep looking for whatever that is.
I was just going to say, I think you have to play sort of mentally the same long game that you do when you're an artist. But what's different, as everybody on this call has already pointed out, is that like going from the opera world, even if you're inclusive of the US and Europe, going from that world into like the global tech job marketplace, it's like moving into an entirely parallel universe, right? So like you are, even in this kind of really challenging job market, for like, say, I'm a product manager for product in particular, I still have thousands more options than I did. It's like I'm not worried that I'm never going to work in product again, right? Like it's just a question of like where am I gonna land next? But I think it's sort of taking advantage of that like willingness to be like, this first thing that I'm in may suck, but it is gonna get better at some point. You're just not in control of it, but also realizing that you're not contained in the same small pond that you were before when you were working in the arts.
I think there's a component of, I think particularly for artists, where the first question anyone asks you at a party, anytime someone meets you, anything, is like, well, what do you do? Like, that's the first question we started this whole conversation with. Well, what's your background? What did you do? What are you doing? Like, there's a what do you do thing that I think particularly for artists, it's very wrapped up in identity. This is who I am. This is why I exist. And that's really not necessary. And there's a lot of social pressure to define yourself by the activity you do for 8 hours a day, or, if you really mean it, then like 12 hours a day, like then you really are worth something. That is all actually artificial. That has little to do with your value as a human. That has little to do with your happiness, frankly. It's not actually all that related. Like there's a lot of people who are out there being like, I'm a singer, and are miserable because of that. And vice versa, are product managers and hate their lives because they're like, they have so much associated with, this is my life as a product manager and I don't like my job right now, so therefore it's all crap. And I think there is something to be said for an ability to step away from that just for a moment and say, is that actually what I need to believe right now? Is it feasible that I could just do an activity and see how well I could tune that activity to the things I want in my life in terms of money or time off or flexibility or whatever? And look at it from that standpoint rather than, well, if I don't make the right decision today about what my future looks like and what my 5-year plan is and my 10-year plan is and where I'm going to be in those years and what my label is going to be and how that's going to reflect on my identity, like that's a lot of pressure to put on a job decision when it's just a thing you're doing sometimes.
And I feel like
And so,
it's tied
yeah, go.
to the perfectionism that was not only expected but kind of demanded of us for so long, that don't you show up to your voice lesson if you're not off book and perfect, you know. I think if you can begin to debunk the perfectionism within you, you'll be able to begin to debunk the perfectionism that just doesn't exist in the world. And like, let's just revel in that, you know. I read that Good Enough Job over the summer, and it helped me one more layer remove my identity from what I do or what I thought I should do or what I did or what I'm gonna do.
I think one other piece to throw in here is that most people coming from the arts like we have um, got used to a life without safety nets. We got used to the idea of, well, I just don't have insurance right now. Obviously, I don't have a retirement. Like obviously, like all these pieces that I think a lot of people get used to of like, well, I can't leave this job because I need the health insurance. I can't leave this job because the benefits are too good. And like, I think you spend enough time in a life where actually you don't have any of that good stuff. You're just jumping from gig to gig, and you jump into tech where all that stuff is provided, and it becomes nice. Like it's fabulous the moment you get really, really good benefits and you're like, this is cool, but it doesn't become shackles. And so I think artists coming into tech are in a position to more readily try out a thing and be like, do I like this? No? Okay, I'm just going to move to the next thing, with a lot less fear than I think most people who start in tech will have. And that's a strength. Like that's a thing that you can actually use. Your ability to bounce generally will increase your salary over time. Like the people who do really well as programmers, like financially, are the people who jump jobs every year and a half. They're not the people who stick with the companies for 10 years straight. And so like that's a really, really powerful tool that you can use.
It's interesting. Something that I've reflected on a lot as a singer is the idea of trying to figure out what I wanted to do when I decided if singing wasn't for me. And I was like, how do I, what exists for me to look at? Where do I start? How do I know what I'm supposed to do? And I'm thinking back on Joe and Gabe, you mentioned this earlier in the call of, looking at maybe people that have a job that might be interesting to you, or who are doing things that you think might be something that you're interested in, and reaching out, leveraging connections, trying to take the time. And I think that there's so much that can be learned from looking at what people are doing or have done, and being able to try and use your own tools to be like, okay, how can I go after that? If this person learned this skill, or was able to pick up this coding language, or was able to go out and build something, maybe that's something that I can try and do. And I always try to tell people, just because you're wanting to go into a new area doesn't mean you have to totally abandon everything about yourself that was so great and so beneficial to being an artist. Those things, that grit, humility, the culture of an environment that you're able to contribute to, are impeccably important when it comes to any job that you're going to have, or any company that's looking to be built. And so I always try to encourage people to embrace that, as opposed to try and completely forget.
I think in terms of leaning on one's network, like there is nothing more gratifying than mentoring someone and then them actually using your advice. And there's also little that's more rare. I joined there's a startup like LGBTQ startup like advocacy organization called Start Out, and they have free mentorship that they offer. And one of those mentors was on network, and I needed a network. I was trying to fundraise at the beginning of my company, and I was like, help, I don't know what I'm doing. And they had an expert specifically in networking. I'm like, okay, cool, great. That's what I need. I'm going to book an hour with this person. Gave me great advice, like a really, really clear plan. I was 1 hour of just like, this is what you're going to do for the next month. And then I booked a call with him a month later saying like, hey, like, cool, I did the things. So like, now what's step 2? Because he said, there's going to be more steps, but this is what you should do for your first month. And he was like, oh, no one's ever done that before. literally just what he said. It was just like, this is what to do. I needed to know what to do. I came back, was like, I did the thing you told me to do. And he was like, oh, that's never happened. And like the idea of you going to like a coaching and then just ignoring what your coach says, the idea of you going to your singing lesson every week after week and being like, I don't care what you say, I'm just going to do the opposite. Like, that's not how it's done.
I have hives thinking about doing that. Like the idea of it is just mind-boggling to me. But it just goes to show you that like that drive that a lot of artists have is not necessarily present in everyone.
It's really not. I mean, apparently so little so that this like employed mentor had never seen it before, just literally doing what's on the page. Like, this is what we as artists bring to the table, is literally like, it feels like nothing. Just do as you're told is, you know, that should be so easy, and yet no one does it. And it is so, and I have a lifelong relationship now with this guy who gave me advice. He's like, we're each other, some of our favorite people. And that all started just because I literally did what the hell he said. The people that you lean on from your network, the idea of saying, hey, you have a job, it's interesting to me, can you tell me how I might get started? And then you literally do anything that they say after that first question, they will feel really good about that. They're not going to feel put out by that, or like, oh my God, I can't believe you did that to me and just dared to ask me a question or dared to take some of my time. Like, no one feels that. The thing that people feel is, oh, wow, someone listened to me. I felt a little bit important today. I felt like I had a good impact on the world. Like, cool, I want to go do that again, maybe even with the same person. So like, don't feel too afraid to lean on people, because they like being leaned on. It's how we feel like we matter in the world.
Though I love that anecdote, and I love that you did that. I love that he actually recognized it, and it's hysterical that nobody had ever done that before.
I think what I would love to kind of take the last few moments for is we think about what you just shared, what we've all just kind of talked about a lot around, you know, what you should do before you start to either reach out to people, or how to prepare yourself for a pivot. Maybe we could take, you know, a few minutes. I'd love to hear from people to either share, if you could highlight one or two things to someone who's maybe not at the moment where they're ready to admit yet that they want to pivot, or someone who is, you know, considering on embarking on this journey, what you maybe wish someone would have told you as you were, you know, gearing up for something like that, or what you would like to, if you had an audience with the talent acquisition teams at companies, or a founder, or someone who's in tech, who's getting ready to hire, you know, their next onslaught of people, what would you want to tell them about potentially people who are coming to them with non-traditional backgrounds?
One thing I might offer, when I was doing sort of like the interior work, thinking about why I wanted to do this and like what it might look like, it was terrifying. It inspired because I had been doing it pretty substantially for a while. It felt like I would have been coming out all over again, in a different way, to sort of like my peers and my teachers and the people who had invested in me in different companies and whatnot. And so real quickly along the way, I tried sort of like different ways of thinking about what like, if I go do this thing and work for these people who work in computers, like, what do I do with the art? What do I do with the artist, right? So like, I tried on sort of internally for a minute, I was like cold turkey, because I talked with like one friend who had left singing to go do something else. And she was like, yep, I took X number of months and I just sort of like shut out the opera world, like didn't talk to anybody, like shut down my socials and blah, 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 blah. And I thought about that for a minute and I was like, that's not me, right? Like shutting out those people and like just completely ignoring the artistic part of myself. That's not me, right? And then I thought, well, does that mean then that like I can't do this if I have this part of me that's so important? Like, what do I do with it? for me, sort of like, the one thing I would want to communicate to everyone is, to the extent that you want to, you don't stop being an artist just because you stop making art full time. Like that doesn't stop, right? Like you were making art in one capacity or another for a long time before you ever did it professionally. You were probably singing when you were 5 in the, in the shower or whatever, right? Or you were face painting, or I don't know, whatever. So that doesn't go away. There is a whole universe of ways that you can find to keep scratching that itch, to incorporate your music making, if you're a musician, you're singing, if you're a singer, into your life, even after you start working in tech. There's lots of different ways to do that. Talk to people, talk to any of us in this room to figure out, like, what sense did we make of it? Like, did we go cold turkey? Did we say, nah, I'm good? Did we still sing a little bit on the side? Did we just become a local singer? Did we stop doing staged work? Did we just sing with a church choir? Like, did we, or did we just sing at people's birthday parties, like once a year or whatever? Like, everybody has different answers. But for me, I ended up sort of, especially while earlier in the transition, I ended up saying that, it used to be that like singing was my main thing and everything else was the side hustle. Now that script has been flipped, right? I work in tech as my bread and butter. I am passionate about product management. I have some very specific industries that I care about. And singing is sometimes still a side hustle for me. Like, and I've gone from having this halfway decent national career to really only occasionally singing in Denver. And that's fine. My life is pretty good. I have no complaints about that, but it took me some time to figure that out. But just, I would, from an emotional standpoint, to get to what Spencer was saying, I would take the time to do that work and to try on different answers for yourself over time to see sort of what fits, to make sense of that. And maybe it'll be easy. Maybe it'll be like, thank God I am out of there. Goodbye, right? And that's, if that is you, that is a perfectly valid answer. There's nothing wrong with that. But there's going to be a lot of people for whom that's not going to be an acceptable answer, right? So just know that there's lots of ways to go about it. That's what I would say.
I think just to add on to that, the idea that everything we do must be turned into a side hustle, that everything must be monetized, that it's like, this ties right back to this idea of, well, what do you do? That is just not needed. And I think there's actually a lot more joy to be taken out of art for art's sake, that opens up, at least. It's fun. I mean, the idea of running out and like doing a church gig when you don't need it, and then just getting a check for a thing that you like doing anyways, like, that's super cool. That's just like bonus money. It's fun. The idea of being paid for things that you enjoy doing, great. The idea of needing to do the things that you thought you enjoyed doing because otherwise you won't be able to pay your bills, that can strip the joy out of a lot of things that could give you a lot of joy. And so I feel like for the people who are really driven, because, and most people listening to this will be really driven. Like, you don't get into the arts that deep unless you care about them for some reason really, really deep. But like, that thing gets to be fueled, that thing gets to be fed in ways, like, without money being involved necessarily. And the pressure to make money be involved is not doing anyone any service. So just, that's maybe another thing just to add on that point, is like, not having to monetize the things that you love may make it so that you love them more.
I love that.
Yeah, I think there's this obsession with it needing to be associated with a dollar sign or a number or something that quantifies, right, what you've been able to do. And it can be a slippery slope, right, if that's how you're measuring all success in any industry, I think. Thank you, everyone. I really appreciate you all taking the time to chat. Before we sort of sign off, is there anything else anyone would like to share?
Just don't be afraid. Dive in. Go see what else there is to do. There's a lot to do in the world.
There's so much to do and there's so much to be explored. And for me, I think, you know, I relate it to the adrenaline high of performing. Jumping into something new that maybe you don't know where the bottom is yet can be just as exciting and thrilling as figuring out what it is you want to do. Sometimes it's actually, you know, taking that jump and sort of free falling for a little bit is scary, but it's, you know, one of those things that sometimes the risk is absolutely worth the reward. Awesome. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you, Gabe, Joe, Spencer, and Michelle, who was with us earlier. I hope that this can maybe be the start of something for all of us to continue to, you know, share ideas and talk shop and, you know, help people who want to do similar things that we've been able to do. So thank you. I really appreciate it.
Thank you all.
Awesome.
Thanks for
Making the space.
Of course, of course.